Hello, everybody. This is Ray Favo. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today is our first ever town hall style event, and I have with me some special guests. First is Todd. He's a friend of ours at the Evangelical Dark Web. He helps me out behind the scenes. And then we got our brothers in Christ over at the Doctrines Forensics. That's another YouTube channel on here. And this is Sean and Kyle. You guys can go ahead and introduce yourselves. As I tell the chat to like refresh if they're not seeing the stream yet.
Hey, Sean, you're on mute, I think.
And I apologize for the Zoom quality because usually Restream is a little bit better than Zoom as far as like audio and visual rendering. But we're going to talk about some important subject matter today, and that is the vaccine mandate wherever it be found. It could be found in the workplace, the church, and, the military. We have something to say about that as well. So we're going to cover a whole different myriad of ways that this issue could affect you. And we're going to try to help provide resources for a number of the solutions or problems that you could be facing and help prepare the believer if, you face a situation. I think a lot of us will be facing this situation, at one point or another. So I'm facing this situation. I don't know about you guys. I think, Todd, you told me something, but, it's just you can, and we'll have time to share stories. Again, if you're in the chat, feel free to share your story and we'll help incorporate it into the stream because, we want to hear from you. And the reason why I'm not doing this alone is because I want to hear from other people as well. And, we can, more iron sharpens iron. That's the point of this town hall style event, is that iron can sharpen iron, especially on an issue that's pressing. And I don't see too many churches or ministries trying to help prepare and equip people other than religious exemptions. So we need to help do that. We need to help each other out. And we should start this event, I think, with an opening prayer. I don't know if anyone wants to do that. I'll be doing a lot of talking, so I'm not sure if I should do that. I
still don't have Sean.
Yeah, I don't have Sean.
Okay. Todd, do you want to open us up in prayer? I think I hear you.
Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to come together, seek your will, Lord, to discuss the topics that are before us, Lord, and bless Ray and the other, Lord, and those that are watching, and give us wisdom and insight, and that you would lead us in the way that you would have us go, Lord, and help us to navigate these challenging times and situations that we're in. Thank you for your goodness and for your faithfulness, and we look forward to seeing your will done, Lord, and ask that you would be with the street and work out all the technical issues, and just bless the speakers tonight.
Amen.
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 Okay, so I have a prepared opening statement that I wanted to read, and it's not necessarily my story. I think we'll get into more personal details later because one of the subjects on our rundown will apply to my situation particularly, and a lot of the situations that I'm seeing around me, because I live in Maryland, and Maryland has a pretty unique economy compared to a lot of other states. So I'm going to read a prepared statement regarding this event. So I've been wanting to do this town hall style event for a while. My hesitance came with wanting to put my advice and resources into practice before I put on an event that I've promoted more than anything I've ever done with Evangelical Dark Web to this point. I have some experience facing this particular issue that we're going to be talking about tonight. I have the experiences of others who are also facing this issue as well. I'm sure there are other Christian organizations helping believers with religious exemptions, but I do not know of anyone putting together resources to help people facing a myriad of situations. But before we get to all that, I want to read a little scripture so as to articulate the premise of where this event is coming from. 1 Corinthians 6, chapter 6, verses 19 and 20 states, "Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and that you are not your own? For you have been bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body." The meaning of this passage in its context is that our bodies belong to God. They do not belong to governments, nor do they belong to employers. Private businesses pay for the labor of their employees. They do not own their bodies. Therefore, employees have no right to mandate vaccines for their employees. And with COVID, there are no bona fide exceptions, as it is neither safe nor effective, as proven by Delta variant. With that said, if you've not gotten vaccinated already, it is because you do not want to. It is because you have a moral or medical objection. Therefore, the purpose of this town hall is to encourage you not to sell out. Live by your convictions. Don't be a sellout. If I get vaccinated to keep my nice job, I will be a sellout. Someone who has gone hard against branch Covidianism to get vaccinated to preserve a paycheck, such as myself, is selling out, in my opinion. Tonight, I want to say that's not happening, and I want to encourage and equip you to say the same. We live our lives for the glory of God, and we put our trust in His providence.
Amen.
Nice.
So I believe the first thing I wanted to cover was vaccine mandates in the church and ministry. Now, this really shouldn't be an issue, but we are seeing organizations like the International Mission Board, which is the largest international missionary organization in the world, I believe. I don't think there's anything a close second, but they are actually mandating the vaccine regardless of where their missionaries are or their exemptions, whether they are religious or medical. So obviously this issue is coming to theologically conservative institutions like the Southern Baptist Convention seems to be on board with vaccine mandates, but it's very possible that other churches will as well. And I just want to open up the floor if you guys are seeing anything about it, because I think that's just unbiblical on its face, and there's no justification for that in any circumstance. And I don't know if you guys are seeing anything like this outside of the International Mission Board, but I'll yield the floor in case you guys are.
Well, Ray, I'll speak up. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear
Okay. So here's a thought and here's a challenge. Back at the beginning of the pandemic, we had churches that basically folded. They folded under the pressure of an unseen vaccination. They folded under the pressure of basically having this unvetted pandemic put upon us, and completely did not really follow the mandate which you just read. Our bodies do belong to the Lord. And what's interesting is now we are seeing, and the churches will be tested again going into the next couple months. And what I mean by that is we're going to have a chance to see whether or not churches will allow people who are unvaccinated to sit in the audience. So those churches out there that finally came to their senses and repented and said, you know what, we are never under the mandate of a government. We're never under the mandate to succumb to the edicts of this world. Here they are again with another crossroad. Now, crossroad would be, as we can see in our culture, they're trying to pit the vaccinated against the unvaccinated. So my question would be, and I'm interested to see moving forward, what actually happens with that? Are churches going to create further divide and not allow people that are unvaccinated in their audiences? It's just a curious question. I haven't seen it, but I'm not so confident that we're going to have so many churches that'll stand up against the vax versus the unvax situation.
Okay, if I interject, I think I have seen it once in America. It was like a small, very leftist church, and I think it was in Atlanta area, and they were doing a vaccine mandate to attend in person. But other than that, you really see this happening overseas. That's where you are mostly seeing this. Like Canada is like probably the most far gone nation in the Western Hemisphere as far as this goes. And I'd say Canada is more far gone than Australia. And you're seeing those churches like what's his face? The guy that was famously defying, and then you got Arthur Pawlowski, who I did a video on as well, who's also famously defying. They're like the 1%, not even the 1%, but they're like a 0.5%. So, their views are not representative of a silent majority or even a silent significant minority in Canada. So I think we're seeing that elsewhere, and I think the lack of biblical justification is the same regardless of where you are in the globe.
Agreed.
Wondering if the implement of the mask policy mandates at the churches will be an indication of what is going to happen with the vaccine.
I mean, one of the mantras that I have is you bend on one issue, you're going to bend on
my
more
state,
issues.
stricter state.
And I think the mask and the vaccine are, bending on the mask will lead to you bending on the vaccine. However, the vaccine is a huge step up. It's not necessarily, it's a ramp on a slippery slope. If you get that analogy, I think.
Absolutely. And, living in Texas, we have our pretty tough governor and Governor Abbott. And a couple things happened a few days ago. I'm sure you guys may have heard, but he basically outlawed, and it will pass in the state Senate, that no company can enforce a vaccination. Well, everyone's watching the debacle that's known as the Southwest Airline Gate, where they're trying to purport that the reason why they are canceling so many flights is because of weather. Well, the weather's not that bad across the country at the moment, but the real argument here is Southwest Airlines and the employees are not going to be bullied into taking a vax mandate. So what gets really interesting here in Texas is how many people will decide not, and how many companies rather will decide to go against the actual law that will be passed here in Texas that Governor Abbott just announced. So even in a state that's super red and super pro freedoms, we have the outliers, and the outliers are starting to show their face. And we know that the Houston area is a hub for United Airlines, whereas that airline just completely laid down from the beginning. Whereas you have the employees that are at Southwest Airlines, they stood up and they're fighting back. And I think
we'll definitely talk about Southwest later on. Someone in the chat who has a Z06 Stingray 18 says probably depends on if big tithers are vaxxed or not in a given church. What do you think about that? Do you think the tithing, that those who are the influential tithers will affect whether a vaccine mandate is imposed in a church? I might actually lean against that. I think that these people just want to collapse a church, so they don't actually care about the tithing, but I could be wrong.
Well, I'm inclined to lean your way too. However, we know that most of the mainstream churches are all about money. Um, that's a really good question, ZO16 Ray. It's a great question. I will say though that so goes the money, so goes the church, and all of it does have a particular link back to businesses. I mean, there's a lot of businesses and small businesses and businesses that are completely tied into what goes on in the local church. So I think it's one and the same. But I wouldn't say that tithers will have a big influence on the church.
Now, if it has to be tithers that are influencing this decision in the right direction, then that church is probably already far gone.
Yes.
So, but good chat. Keep the chats coming because I want to incorporate them into the stream. And don't forget that, don't be afraid to share your story in the stream because we want to hear from you. And, we're going to share our experiences as well. Particularly when we get to the mandates in the workplace spot, I'll share my experiences. But it seems like in the church, we have some. I think we have clear biblical guidance on if a church wants to mandate vaccines. And Innovation HQ, you note that Mark Dever and his churches are wanting to have segregated seating for vax and unvaxxed, which is interesting. I must have missed those articles, but it'll be interesting to see how that moves forward. There aren't that many good churches here in Maryland, and I believe that's where Mark Dever's church is. That is in DC, but I think close enough.
Ray, one of the thoughts that came up at the beginning of the quote unquote vaccination mandates, I just thought about the scripture, and it brought me back to think about what the Bible says in Daniel chapter 3. We've got the story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I remember, I think it was August when Biden got up and made his particular statement that he was going to mandate this. The one thing that stuck out to me from a biblical standpoint was those boys gave us an example of why we should not bow down to the edicts of what the government of their day. So there's a lot of things that we can glean from the scriptures. And their position was, well, we don't care what they say. We're not going to bow down. And if our God, delivers us, great. And if he doesn't, great. And so I think that we could really use the scriptures to find some comfort and some confidence. Because God, as we know, the end of that story, God did deliver those 3 Hebrew boys. So I felt like there were some parallels in what we were being told to do and what we saw in scripture and what the biblical response should be for Christians. And that's a great place to start in Daniel chapter 3 and just take your time and read that for confidence and motivation.
So, yeah, exactly. I think especially, that's what we're trying to do here is help motivate Christians to live by their convictions. And I think, we don't need an excuse we have plenty of excuses and reasons to bow out. And the point of this town hall, or, it could also be called a strategy session, is to help equip us to not do it on a practical level. I think, scripture that will fortify you on a spiritual level. And, that's extremely necessary. That's why I wanted to read 1 Corinthians earlier in the stream. But we also need to be prepared on a physical, material level as well, so as to not invite temptation. If you didn't study for a test, that temptation of cheating increases. And just to use an analogy, so I think we should move on to talk about understanding an employer's policy. So if you're no matter your workplace, you need to understand your employer's policy on this issue. A lot of places won't touch the issue because they're not going to mandate vaccines, but a lot of places are highly considering it, especially since Biden made his announcement to make a executive order and to make rules. And we're going to talk about how that announcement will manifest itself for different industries. But for starters, I want to talk about questions you should ask your employers. These are just general questions that I think can apply to anyone. So these are 2 questions that I asked because my work had a town hall, not like this, but like with 300 people, and we weren't really allowed to speak at all. But well, the HR spoke, but my work had a town hall, and I submitted these 2 questions, and they didn't read the second part. So let's read both questions, and you'll probably get why they didn't read the second part of this 2-part question. What is your process for religious exemptions? What exactly gives you the authority or expertise to judge a religious exemption according to one's faith tradition? So I submitted that in my work's chat, and they read it out loud, and then they were about to read the second part, and like, oh, not going to read that. Yet, interestingly enough, obviously these are the most important questions you can ask about a religious exemption policy. Is there one, and how do you do it? What the nuts and bolts of a religious exemption, and then what gives them the authority to judge the validity of a religious exemption. And the purpose of that question is they're not going to use the Pope or Ed Stetzer as authority figures to say that your religious exemption's invalid. Because if you're a Catholic, I could totally see that happening. And if you're an evangelical, they can pull from Francis Collins or Ed Stetzer, Tim Keller, all these effeminate Big Eva types. So what exactly gives you the authority or expertise to judge a religious exemption according to one's faith tradition? I asked that. They did not answer it. But the answer that they did give me was a bunch of gobbledygook. I'm not kidding. So this is my experience on this issue, is that I asked those questions to my employer, or at least the HR department, in a town hall, public setting. And they gave me, like, I have the transcript created by Microsoft Teams, which isn't a great transcript because I didn't transcribe the company name correctly, but it was so gobbledygook that I read it like twice since then. And all I can gather is the company does not seem to want to make people do what they don't want to do. And it looks like there will be a process for religious exemption. But when I ask a nuts and bolts question, I'd like a nuts and bolts answer. But, I work in IT, so I don't know how he didn't want to. It's an IT company, so it's weird that we got such a gobbledygook answer that I got. So it looks like I might be safe on this issue, but I don't know because they weren't very clear. But there'll be, I'll talk more about that when we get into that particular section. But you got to understand your employer's policies on religious exemptions. Don't be afraid to ask. And another question, this is not one I asked, but this is a pretty important question as well. What liability does the company assume for adverse reactions? If a company is going to be forcing you to take a vaccine, what liability are they assuming for adverse reactions? Are they just going to give you a sick day? Are they, going to put you on a short-term disability? If you have a really severe reaction, what liability are they assuming for forcing you in order to keep your job to do this? And I think if you ask that definitely sets them aback a little bit. But that's an important question to ask because it's about liability. And companies don't like having liability or assuming liability. And it makes them think. And of course, you can always ask about, are there any exemptions medically, whether for superior natural immunity or high risk profile with the vaccine? I think that's another question to ask. Are they going to recognize natural immunity? And so far, America has been anti-natural immunity, but it's always worth it to ask that question. Now, do any of you have any questions that you would recommend asking that I didn't come up with?
Well, having experienced this just recently, Ray, we were approached with ambiguous, an overview that was so ambiguous. No one in the company now. I work for a media company. You work in IT. We probably have 300 people that work in my company, and so we were told almost 12 weeks ago that if by October 2nd, if none of us actually took the vaccination, that we would be terminated. And there were 2 memos that was sent from corporate down to address that. So since I'm already a man of conviction, it really didn't matter to me what they said because I was not going to get vaxxed. So I actually had a call from HR, and they were going around individually talking to every employee about whether or not they did or did not get vaccinated, which I thought was strange and made me very uncomfortable. So I decided just to answer straight up. You know, my family and I, we sat down, we discussed that, one, we are not anti-vax. However, we are anti-COVID vaccination, and that we are not comfortable with the research and the real science behind it. So no, we will not be getting the vaccine. And he mentioned, well, is there any other type of exemption that you can, have? And so he mentioned medical, and then they mentioned religious. Well, I'm an ordained minister. I said, well, I am an ordained minister, and I was able to submit some ministry credentials, as well as a letter that I pulled from a website that was the assertion for religious exemptions to the vaccination. And what I really liked about the letter that I found, it actually cited several real studies about the properties inside the vaccine that were nefarious in terms of fetal tissue and other elements, nanoparticulates that could make people sick. Long story short, last week I got a call and they said, well, your religious exemption had been approved. That was it. But there's a caveat. We need you to submit to a weekly COVID vaccine test before you go in and out or deal with clients, which is really odd for me because I'm thinking—
You don't deal with clients?
I do deal with clients, but the issue is, what makes you think I'm going to go to a client and and transmit COVID? I have to go to the grocery store. I got to get gas. I walk my dog, all these things that we do. So I don't think a lot of companies really have a solid answer. I think some of them are looking to kind of slip out of this noose because they came down pretty hard with these memorandums, and we come up with this soft landing. And I found out that only 3 people out of a company of tens of thousands were actually let go. So I don't know why.
Now, are they paying for these tests or?
No, they're not paying for it. They were recommending that I find local test centers where they're free. And I have yet to actually take a test. It's been about 10 days. But the long and short, they're still putting the onus and the pressure on us here in this market locally to have some type of requirement that keeps us in compliance to be able to maintain, as they gave me, my religious exemption. So there's just so much gray area with it.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. My work hasn't mentioned anything about testing requirements. And and I'll talk more about that whole industry later on, because it's really interesting what's going on with federal contractors. So, I'll have a lot to say about that issue. As far as religious exemptions, since you brought that up, again, I think that Jordan Hall of Protestia probably wrote the best religious exemption I've seen, and I recommend it on Evangelical Dark Web. You can download it there. I think that is really airtight theologically, and it doesn't go too far on certain arguments. Like, I don't disagree that the fact that this vaccine is tested with fetal cell lines, I acknowledge that that's true, but that is enough of a moral objection. However, I don't necessarily think it's the strongest, because you'd have to prove that you apply that same moral standard to every single medicine out there. And I don't know. I wasn't comfortable putting all my eggs in that particular basket, but I do believe it is a sufficient basket.
Mm-hmm.
So I like this one, which focused more on the premise, on the underlying premise of, who has authority over these things, who has authority to do this. The president does not have the authority to mandate this. Therefore, I would be in biblical obedience to not comply and stuff like that. It goes through more systemic arguments, and then it argues against the ideas. We're not thinking that we're going to somehow be miraculously saved should we contract COVID. That is not an expectation that we have. So it steers away from false objections that people would have to Christians in general from not taking the vaccine. But it does mention the fetal cell abortion connection, and how, our bodies are a temple, and you don't want to inject that type of stuff into your temple, to the Holy Spirit. So But again, I think it should be more. I think the religious exemption should be more foundational, in my opinion. So that's the one I recommend. I don't know if you guys have any comment on. Kyle or Todd have any comments on religious exemptions that you've seen used or anything like that?
I'm self-employed, so it hasn't affected me, but my wife is an educator, and my son works. But he also part-time job in a senior center. So it's very different. I think in Oregon it's not a full order. It's on the organization. So my wife's organization, they work remotely, and so they were inclined to accept anything. And she did use the line of thinking that you mentioned about her body being a temple, and they automatically, or they, quickly approved her religious exemption. My son, again, works at a senior center. They were hard. They said a Christian worldview is not a basis for getting a religious exemption. And they objected and brought him in multiple times to pick apart his initial difficulties with the vaccine mandate, and they even were ridiculing it. And so at that point, my son gave notice. Son said, "Well, there is the option if you give us a letter from your pastor, we'll look at it." And so until he gave notice, they were basically him that they were not inclined to accept any of his reasons. Part of it was his
why they did that though?
Our bodies, and so for keep
why they caved though?
Get new employees. So he did have a win there.
No, I think that's the reason why they caved was because they were afraid of an EEOC complaint. Because he could have come at them with an EEOC complaint because they were making, the way you put it, they were ridiculing his faith, and then they were denying a religious exemption. That an equal opportunity, something.
Obviously, they wanted
EEOC
to keep him.
is an acronym, but they could have been opened up to a lawsuit if he had left. Just under the law, that's an EEOC. Hostile work environment on religious grounds. So they probably didn't about face on that ground alone. But that's interesting the way you have like two different situations, one where they're willing to accept a religious exemption, not even scrutinize, and another one where they're trying to scrutinize it hard. So it's,
well, my son,
very important to ask whether, like I said, what gives you the authority or expertise to judge a religious exemption
on their minds, but my son is not a
your audio is cutting out. So, and of course, I don't know if you guys have any experience with medical connection or medical exemptions at all. But as for everyone else, I think anything can qualify as a religious exemption, in my opinion, because the whole premise of the employer does not own your body. So let's talk about mandates in the workplace. And this is kind of where we're going to get into different industries. So I wanted to start out with healthcare workers because that's definitely a big issue that we're seeing all over the country. And again, if you have a story to share in the chat, definitely do that.
I agree with you. Again, I think a lot of it came down to they've had numerous other people.
Okay, so in New York, we saw a federal judge rule, I believe, earlier this week that they had to accept religious exemptions. I believe that was the update out of New York. And in Maine, there's a lawsuit by Maine healthcare workers fighting the vaccine mandate. And they actually argue against the efficacy of the vaccine and the safety numbers and how, they got Dr. Peter McCullough testifying on their behalf for this lawsuit that they filed. So it's very interesting what's going on and developing there because this lawsuit in Maine, and you can go look this up at mainstandup.org, mainstandup.org. And I'm going to, in this section of the town hall, I'm going to read off a lot of URLs. And I want you to know that I will publish my resources, my town hall notes as an article after the stream is concluded. I will publish that so you can have this for free. Not going to charge for any of these resources or anything like that. But mainstandup.org is where you can go check on the progress of this lawsuit in Maine, where they're actually arguing against the efficacy of the vaccine in court. So that'll be very interesting to see what's developing there. As far as the rest of the country goes, in Maryland, I don't hear very good things about opposing vaccine mandates in healthcare industry. I am hearing rumors and whispers about nurses being fired or going to be fired for not complying. That was definitely the case when I was doing a lot of hospital trips when my wife was going into labor or not going into labor. It was a prolonged labor. So there's multiple hospital trips and you could hear nurses chirping about this in the background. And, they were talking about this person's not going to get it and they're going to get fired, or you could just hear those conversations. And that's a good point that I'm seeing in the chat is we also need to fight for the rights of our non-Christian neighbors and coworkers. And that is completely true. Word about the rights of those without religious beliefs who don't want the vax. And let me just pull that question up because when I asked about religious exemptions at my work, that's kind of the response that they gave, actually. And it was a very gobbledygook way of putting it, but that's, because the first words that the guy said when I asked that question in their town hall was, "What about the Festivus for the rest of us?" I'm like face palming at that, but that's kind of the approach he took. So it doesn't look like this company in particular wants to force people to do something that they don't want to do or uncomfortable with doing. So, and again, when we give up our rights, a lot of big Evo publications tell us that we need to lay down our rights as Christians, but we're actually in doing that laying down our neighbors' rights. Mm-hmm. So that's something to always keep in mind. So healthcare, that's a huge, lot of variance around the country on this issue. And it's frankly a little bit disturbing in my opinion, but in some states you're hearing religious exemptions are more readily accepted, in others you're not. And then it depends on who owns the hospital system. How much business do they do with the federal government? One of those Project Veritas videos was in a federally owned hospital, and where the employee died from a vaccine adverse reaction. That was what one of those Project Veritas videos was about and describing. So then we have the military, and that's another really odd, it's its own category as far as seeking a religious exemption, because it's kind of well known and well understood that if you're in the military, you get a lot of vaccines for everything. They vaccinate you against everything. And, so there's a surrendering of certain rights that you have in order to participate in the military. That's a pretty well understood concept. How far does that go? How far does it go on this issue? That is another interesting question. And it seems like they're fighting in Congress currently about whether those who want to refuse the vaccine should be dishonorably discharged or honorably discharged or discharged at all. Especially those who are nearing the military retirement, or are undeployable because they're close to military retirement. So one resource or two resources, they're basically the same guy, but he has two URLs that I want to point out is Yount's Law, YOUNTSLAW.com. And this is a military defense attorney. And he has an organization specifically about this called standwithwarriors.org. And that's one resource you can go to if you want to specifically help military servicemen in this situation. And the way he describes it is that this is a very arbitrary mandate and it doesn't really make sense. And he seems to think that the military is not as solidified on this as one would think, as it seems, as the messaging we're getting from the president of the United States. It seems like the military is a lot more arbitrary and flexible on this issue. The way he describes it is that the military is generally willing to accommodate you as long as you can still serve and stuff like that. So that is like the established precedent is the way he explains it, because he's a military defense attorney. And, I think that's your go-to expert on this issue if you are a U.S. serviceman or have family that are U.S. servicemen. I don't know if you guys have anything to say on the military or healthcare workers on vaccine mandates.
This morning I was listening to Sandy Rios on American Family Radio, and she gave a kind of a stunning report about the actual numbers of military that actually have passed away from COVID. And it was a small number. It was between 60 and 100. So what's really telling here is that with the multiple vaccinations that people in the military do get, they certainly have a better than average chance of fighting off any type of virus. And so, interesting enough, the crux of her conversation this morning was about the number of military people and the increase in the mental health, the decrease in the mental health wellness of so many military and the increase in suicide. So I don't know how all that correlates, but I think this pressure that the men and women that are serving in the military that are getting to basically be forced to do something that is outside of their belief system is causing a lot of conflict. And it makes you wonder, what's this process? Is this a culling process? Is this a weakening process? Because at any point, we don't want to have less military men and women. We probably need more. So I think there's multiple layers to be said about the pressure, the undue pressure that is being put on those that are serving in the military.
Yeah, the military is like a lot of other institutions where you're seeing a lot of the corruption that's in the military. It's the same corruption that we're seeing in public education and in the criminal justice system. It's that same type of swamp mentality, and it definitely led to the debacle in Afghanistan. I want to share a chat. It'll come up. I resigned from Air Force Guard for the inconsistent mask requirements and vax requirements coming. Plus, the Afghan situation was so embarrassing and shameful for the military, and that's definitely true. And it definitely stems from I think a lot of that stems from a cultural at the top and the culture there, because there's no excuse for the Afghanistan situation whatsoever.
Agreed. No excuse.
So federal contractors was next on the rundown, and this is just my area of expertise as far as like that goes. So Biden's mandate applied to them even more than it does federal employees. like the post office workers are seemingly exempt from this upcoming mandate. Through the renewing and awarding of contracts, extra clauses that impose mandates are intended to be implemented to make the contractors impose this on their employees. So, meaning, each government contract has to renew every year, and these are called like option years, stuff like that. The contract that I work on renews in March, but this is probably going to be starting in October and sweep the rest of the year. So, and that's the rumors that I'm hearing about this. So, what I'm seeing, because I have a sample size of like 4 companies, and these are pretty diverse in size. And the smaller companies seem reluctant to mandate their employees get vaccinated as they await the official rules to be implemented. And the publicly traded companies seem more on board. And mainly the only company that I know of mandating this on their employees gung-ho out the door is the defense contractor you would probably recognize. But again, I kind of want to protect my sources. I don't want to my contacts. Yeah, so I'm not going to be super general. But as far as I know, like I kind of described how my company's reacting. They aren't really going full bore just yet. They're kind of waiting and seeing. They were radio silent on this issue for like 3 weeks after September 9th. They were radio silent for like 3 weeks. So these companies aren't quick to ask. I know someone else whose company was trying to do a survey of, are you vaccinated? Are you going to get vaccinated? And then one company's like, get it or else. And that or else, the only caveat was unless you live in a state where this is specifically illegal, which I believe Montana is the only state where it's specifically illegal. According to that company, I guess. I don't know where these executive orders stand on that. So that was one. And then, basically all the other companies are kind of setting up exemption forms from what I hear. Now, to touch on the mask issue. Okay, we got another government contractor story in the chat. Thankfully, my position is with a government contractor, but not a contract slot. My company is trying to minimally meet this requirement for on government sites. Now, I guess that refers to you are part of more, I don't want to say overhead, but that's probably something. Is that the situation that you're in? You're like in overhead, not billing the contract itself. So, but apparently the mandate is thought to be applied to those people as well. And it's a very confusing situation because Biden spoke, but these rules haven't come out yet. So it'll be interesting to see how these affect what the actual rules will be. And I don't believe that these rules that they write can contradict existing law, which will be another hurdle for them to jump through as far as religious exemptions go. But again, one company doesn't really seem to care about that at all. They just want to go for it. And another major company, and this is where we're starting to see some activism rise up among federal contractors, to touch on Northrop Grumman, which is a major company. I want to say they're publicly traded. It seems like their employees are organizing a rally against the mask mandates in the workplace in Maryland, Florida, and California on Monday, October 18th. More information at mandateswon'tfly.com. And that URL, mandateswon'tfly.com, is a play on the fact that they are an aerospace federal contractor. So, that seems to be, they're incorporating some punnery into their opposition. But again, the fact that it's about mask mandates also indicative that this company is not going full bore on the vaccine requirement. So it seems like there is an apparatus for federal contractors fighting these vaccine requirements is starting to form, and that's pretty interesting to watch, especially as that's not a you wouldn't think that these people would be as resistant to it as because they get their money ultimately from federal government. So you would think they would be more compliant, but it's interesting to see this happen.
So Ray, I have a question for you, just because you're going to help me think this through. There are a lot of companies that are not going full bore on this vaccine. So why do you think they're treading so lightly? I mean, are they looking for some type of marker? But I'm noticing around the country that they're kind of half-stepping and then ambiguously not talking. I know my company went ghost on us for 8 weeks after sending these threatening memos, and then we didn't hear anything. And even now, I don't know what's going to happen. We have a mandate to go back to work in the office physically on November the 15th. But no one's talking about what's going to happen on November 15th. Are we going back with a mask mandate? Are we going back with everybody needs to be tested? I don't know what the tipping point is in terms of what's going to cause people to, or companies to really put that hammer down, especially those companies that are 100 plus. I work for a 100 plus employee company. So it's a little foggy. And I don't know what I'm just kind of curious. I mean, what do you think they're waiting for?
To me, it depends on how much they want to go, how much they're really bought into it. And I would have thought that my company is really bought into it. Like, this is a company, and again, I'm not trying to badmouth my company, but they celebrate Stacey Abrams as a civil rights icon multiple times. I kid you not. Yet they also really prioritize wellness. So employee wellness. So they have a lot of zany events that you can attend for employee wellness. So to me, it kind of stems from that. Like, they, might actually, they talk about how they care for their employees, and it's a veteran-owned company, and that maybe that's the answer. They actually care about their employees. So that might be the answer for me. As far as other companies go, I think they're afraid to tread on the issue. And because it's not going to be an easy issue to step on. But obviously, certain people want to do it a lot. They also don't know what the rules are, because federal contractors, you really have to care what these rules are as far as and what compliance means. But I don't know what causes a company to hesitate other than caring for your employees, or the fiduciary duty of not opening yourself up to a EEOC complaint or a discrimination lawsuit.
Right.
I think those are the two answers, because I don't think anyone out there is like, no, the vaccine isn't worth doing this for. I don't think any major companies are really opposing it on the premise. Right. That's just my observation. But good question on that. So everyone else, this is where we're going to talk about like Southwest and stuff like that, because there's, again, because the Biden mandate not just applied to federal contractors, because they didn't get that 100 employee or more rule. So everyone else is the people that work for a company that has 100 and more employees. And the intention there is to use OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Hazard Administration, I think is what it stands for, to enforce this, which is a very, which sounds more severe than it actually is, because I don't think OSHA is going to be they don't have the manpower to be doing safety checks at every company that exists. They don't have the manpower to enforce this. So there's that. But again, I think companies, the companies that want to mandate their employees are looking for an excuse to do so. And this executive speech by Biden is giving them that excuse that they want. So this is applying to a lot of people, like airlines. We're seeing Southwest basically lead the way. And you mentioned them earlier. They're leading the way in this.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. It seems to be a tremendous separation going on. You can see the board real clearly now. I mean, it seems over the last 6 months that the administration has gotten more aggressive. And am I mistaken, but wasn't the first call to action was the federal employees that were required to get vaccinated? And it's all kind of seemed to cascade downhill from there. I think that was back in the summer. I just somehow remember that they were pushing all federal employees, and that was the start of it.
Yeah, I do believe that was something in the summer, and yet certain people are exempt because Yeah, let's be blunt. I think the post office is exempt because of the whole going postal thing. Because they know that if a post office worker can get disgruntled, they're actually going to be serious about it, or they're going to be too serious about it. So I think that's why they didn't impose the mandate on the post office. That, and the other thing is what happens when the post office shuts down. Yeah, they've already made the post office apparently slower. So, can they really operate like California docks? That would do so much damage to the country. I don't think they don't want to take that risk. Especially, politically, they tout the post office so much. The Biden administration did, so they don't want to take the risk of angering those people. My opinion on that. Obviously, with the military, they think they can use the chain of command as a bully pulpit on this, and to some degree, they can. As far as every other federal employee, again, I don't know what the situation is with compliance or what resistance is mounting to that. So I can't entirely speak to that, but it does seem like those people in general seem more compliant than the contractors, and from what I gather.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with you. Agree with you on that.
So, and just some general principles, because when we talk about fighting these vaccine mandates in the workplace, you talked about, again, you brought up Southwest earlier, and the general principles, organizing increases your collective bargaining power. This is the whole premise of a labor union, but you don't need a labor union organization to use collective bargaining or to increase your bargaining power. The more employees gather together, the more your bargaining power increases in this type of situation. As we saw with Southwest, they cannot handle a temporary labor shortage even for a day without massive cancellations and backlogs. They can't handle non-compliance. So Southwest Airlines is the model thus far. Striking, slowdowns, sick outs, which I guess is a new concept, are all on the table in my opinion. Most companies are ill prepared to take significant pushback, and they are counting on compliance. They might have some HR formula that says, okay, if we implement this policy this way, only 2% of people will lose 2% of our workforce, and we can replace that. But they might not be prepared to lose 4% or 6%. So they have probably a mathematical formula as how much they can lose with their requirement, and they think they can beat it. And you as employees need to show them that they can't.
Yeah, that's a tremendous gamble. I just don't understand, since when businesses don't like to make money, but there's a lot of companies that are falling on the sword just to be compliant with this administration. And it's just a sad indictment on capitalism. Interesting.
Well, I don't really think it's capitalism. To me, it's actually fascism. The inseparation between corporations and state, where the corporations are basically being actors of the state. Biden's not imposing the mandate on the general population. He's just imposing it on all these people that will then impose it on. Yeah. And that proxy is where, that proxy is fascism, where you have private ownership, but public control in the nationalization of industries. So, now here's where we can talk about states like Texas. If you live in a state opposing vaccine mandates in the workplace, filing an EEOC complaint with their respective state agency might be an effective strategy worth trying in order to jumpstart a race to precedent in the courts. So I live in Maryland, so I don't think this is really an option for me. But, you said you live in Texas, and I think that might be an option for you. Might be an option for someone living in Montana, might be an option for someone living in Missouri, but I don't think it's an option for someone living in Maryland. But and in some industries, I think it's better to be fired than to quit. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but if you get fired, there is some sort of severance, generally speaking, in a lot of cases. Otherwise, if the only reason to quit would be, I can see if you're a federal contractor, because on security clearance forms, you are asked if you've been fired from a job. So it might be best to quit so you can take your security clearance or not jeopardize that in any way, shape, or form and just move on to the next job. That might be a good reason to not be fired. But I don't think it's better. It's better to make them pull the trigger than to
Correct.
fall on the sword.
Yeah. And I've gotten some advice on that, just kind of waiting week after week after week. And the advice that I got legally was, let them fire you, let them tell you goodbye, because then you have legal recourse on, none of this is constitutional. And so you stand in a better position to fight back, either via a class action lawsuit or just, having an attorney to an employment attorney fight the the discrepancy in the firing process, because all of it's just illegal. So, but again, in my case, what I thought was going to happen didn't happen. I think somehow my company got a little scared off of it because they love money. They love money, and they were going to lose a massive percentage of the employees there, because we talk, even though they were a little heavy-handed. I think they were concerned about, man, we can't lose 10 to 15% of our workforce. That's going to cost us millions. So maybe there are some smart people in those boardrooms that are thinking profits and people and not just being heavy-handed.
Bill makes a good point here in the chat. If you're fired, you may be more likely to get unemployment. And again, like you said, that was more grounds for a lawsuit. And I agree with that as well. That's another, again, I'm not really for taking the government check, but if the government is the reason why you're ultimately losing your job and your livelihood, I don't think you shouldn't take advantage of what opportunities exist for you and your family. And obviously, as Christians, I think we have a moral obligation to find work and not live off the check longer than we need to. I believe the verse on that is first, I can't remember which Thessalonians, but chapter 4, verse 11, I think, about living quiet lives. The context of that was that they were selling their stuff thinking Jesus was going to return imminently, and they were getting into debt, and we should not be living off of the world. We should be self-sustaining.
Yes.
So the legality of these orders and mandates is key as well. It brings to mind the eviction moratorium. They did that knowing that it was not legal or constitutional, but after it was struck down by the courts, Biden just gave the excuse that, well, we knew it, but we were just hoping that we would be able to help enough people for a short amount of time, and that was the goal. And so the just like the ATF cannot make up rules that are so defined without legislative input or oversight. And in Oregon, the governor keeps moving the goalpost on her date for getting certain employees vaccinated by the 18th because there is non-compliance, and really they haven't followed any of the statutory regulations to implement executive orders or administrative rules. And so really we've had a court decision from our Court of Appeals here in Oregon that said these aren't rules, they're just words. They have no basis in law, and so there's really requirement to follow the mask mandate, the vaccine mandates that have been coming down, at least in our state, and we see some of that at the federal level, is that they're just throwing these things out there without having set any specifics or rules or any input from the the Congress. So the legal point, I think, will be key as we further along in this.
Yeah, and again, there is a race to get precedent in the courts mandates. And it looks like the New York mandate on the healthcare workers will probably set a lot of the precedent for that state. But I do worry about the Supreme Court level because Amy Coney Barrett she's a Branch Covidian as far as I know. Like she was that's not who I would have chosen to fill that seat. So just my opinion, because she was weak on that issue. And it doesn't seem like the Supreme Court wants to take up this issue at all. And I'm kind of worried that if they do, it'll be bad. So ultimately,
they're relatively silent on everything. It's like, hey, welcome to America, break the law, we don't care. That's how I feel about the Supreme Court. We don't really want to deal with it.
I know
seems to be the temp.
And they don't want to deal with the issues that were facing churches, and even when they rejected the mandates on churches, they didn't really do it from the right premise. And it's just disgusting what the Supreme Court has done on that level. And the supposedly conservative justices haven't really been all that good on this front, in my opinion. So fighting back is one of your options. That was the option that we just discussed. So basically, I think there are four options that you have. And fighting back is one of them. As obviously, if they don't accept a religious exemption, like step one is to understand your company's policies. Oh, thank you for pulling that up. It was 1 Thessalonians. And ye shall be study and be quiet and do that your own business and work with your own hands as we commanded you. So that's the verse I was referencing as far as that goes. So that's the mentality that we should have, is that we are self-sustaining and not borrowing from the world. So fighting back was one of your options. Finding a new job is the second option, because there's no reason to turn down a better opportunity if it presents itself. So there are numerous job boards out there for jobs that don't mandate the vaccine. Gab has a no-vax job board, and I'll have that linked in the notes that I'm going to publish about this afterwards. And from there, you can get a whole bunch of other job boards that are also no-vax. And so
you could also do a search specifically for jobs that are remote only. I actually did that just to see what that looked like. Just because this whole dynamic since March of 2020 has forced people to get used to and get better at working remotely. So there's a new silo or of opportunities where people saying, hey, we're gonna kind of fold up our brick and mortar and let a lot of people work remotely. So that's another strategic thing that people can think about.
I want to highlight what Nicholas said. I don't think we should use exemptions because we are participating in a criminal mandate. Now, I don't agree with that, but I like where your head's at. And the religious exemption that I recommend actually says something along those lines, where it's like, if I have to show up in court and testify, I will do so under protest. But, at the end, they can't make you do this. And that is something... it's one thing to use the system to beat the system. I don't think that's necessarily the same thing as I don't think you're in sin for using the existing system to beat it, in my opinion. But it's an interesting point to hand out. To what degree should we reject the premise of the mandate in general? And I agree we should reject it entirely, but I don't rule out using the system to beat it.
Don't rule out an exemption request. If you just ignore it, you're fired summarily. So there's that. I mean, so you have to use the system unless you're wanting to fight it earlier on than without having even attempted to put in some sort of exemption request.
Then there's the issue of like insubordination. If you refuse to either get show your papers or show an exemption, that could be seen as more insubordination than refusing the vaccine. Could be another issue. So you mentioned searching for remote jobs, and then you hear about remote jobs requiring the vaccine mandate, which I work remotely as well. So, that doesn't exactly change my situation. And now the flaw that I'm seeing in these job boards is that many of the jobs, and maybe it's because I'm looking at a lot of the remote stuff because I don't see much in Maryland. Many of the jobs are either IT or sales or marketing. So
Right.
I think the there's limitations in these job boards, unfortunately, in what fields you can pursue with them. That's just a blunt observation. I don't know if you guys have looked into that and have a different observation. If you're in the chat and you've looked into that, let me know. But I looked into it just because I want to know what my options are. And one of my options is to find a new job. And what I saw when looking at these job boards is that a lot of them are sales and marketing, which a lot of sales and marketing jobs aren't good sales and marketing jobs. Just got to be blunt about that. I've worked at them before. And I've applied to them before. They're not very good sales and marketing jobs. And IT, like I work in IT, but I don't know how qualified I am to work at another IT job. So that's kind of the nervousness I have about that, because I don't really have a degree in IT. I just can learn things. I can be trained to do things. And, so I'm extremely coachable, but I'm not like well-versed in the lingo or, technically qualified as much as other people. So that makes me more nervous about that. So I don't know. And then of course, for a lot of people, it would be a career change. But as far as like finding ordinary jobs, yeah, it's rough. Not to be braggadocious or anything, but then you got to think about your income level, and certain jobs might be beneath that. And not that you should rule that out if you're still, which would be automatically ruled out in your head if you're still employed. And the more it becomes, the when that's not an issue, like if you're fired for the vaccine mandate, then you're going to take the job. But if you're not really going to consider it. So that's the flaw that I'm seeing in much of the job boards out there. I don't know if you guys have any more input on the finding a job category, finding a job that doesn't mandate it. And of course, you can always look local. But I mean, you're self-employed, so you're good. And Kyle, are you in a situation like this as far as vaccine mandates go, or?
No, I'm self-employed, but the one thing I would add to this conversation is 1 John 5:14, and this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he heareth us. So if you are looking for, I'll say, a new lifestyle, a new occupation, just ask him. Just ask God, in prayer, dear Lord, I want to do something that is in accordance with your will. I want you to take this opportunity, this whole COVID-19, crazy time in our earth, in our history, to separate myself further from the world and further from the government. And this actually goes in line with the question that was brought up, or the statement rather that was brought up earlier in regards to the federal unemployment. I think we should stay away from that at all costs. Not because we should necessarily feel guilty if we have to go on unemployment, and that's what it's there for, but that's really a safety net. And taking unemployment as a strategic way to try and get around something that we shouldn't even have put ourselves in the position of having to get around, that to me just works against everything that we proclaim as believers, because we don't want to take a handout. That really hurts our fellow man in the country even more by plunging us further into national debt. It seems like a small amount of money, but when so many people in this country are taking unemployment. I mean, they're just printing that money. So when we think of inflation and all this stuff, I mean, that's not helping that. So I think ethically, it just doesn't seem right to me. But the bigger picture here is that consulting God, because this is the very thing that is just way too big for us as individuals to be able to even comprehend. I mean, you're talking about medicine and big pharma and how to deal with that as an individual, but then at the church level, and the church is in shambles. So I mean, you've got all these different dynamics at play, and when we have to come together on a conference call and try to sort it all out as just broken believers who are part of this fallen system, and that right now is the very time we should be going to God and just saying, Lord, this is complicated, and so some of it is nuanced, some of it is just very hard to even quantify and understand. What do you want me to do with my life? And some people, they may not have the ability to just up and quit their job. I mean, we got to be realistic, but we also have to realize that this is the church's fault in a lot of ways. We're getting exactly what we deserve, and I'm going to hold myself accountable. I'm going to let you three speak for yourself, but we are part of a greater church that has fallen away. So we are going to suffer the consequences of their sin. And we are part of a wicked country. And so we are going to suffer the consequences of the country's sin. And that's just the way it's always been. That was the way it was in ancient Israel, when maybe there were a few righteous people amongst many unrighteous people. Well, they all went into captivity. So we just have to be mindful of all of these things and go to the Lord in prayer and take the opportunity that we have right now in this convoluted situation to reevaluate and examine ourselves. But also, like I said, remember the verse from 1 John, that we need to go to the Lord in prayer and ask him. And I don't believe that the Lord is going to say, no, you're on your own with this one. I mean, that's laughable. Of course he's going to be there. Of course he wants to help us. But we got to relinquish some of that control and, trying to be big shots and take all these matters into our own hands and just humble ourselves that this is, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, vax mandates. That's way too big for a fallible human being to process. So anyway, that's my 5 cents. So.
Yeah. Like a lot of that. And, again, everything's local if you think about it. Like, we're not really dealing with, we wrestle with principalities and powers, but this manifests itself in the local situation.
Yeah,
that's
I
just
agree.
something to keep in mind.
Agree. And I think the stronger our bonds are with our fellow man and the church, and the believers, like what we're doing here, I think that's really, really important. So just being humble.
So that covers option 2, finding a job. Again, you can fight back, you can find a job or find a new job. Don't turn down a better opportunity or a new opportunity, and certainly trust God with that, because I know a lot of people looking for jobs, and it's not even related to this, but because it's tough if you're a college graduate finding a job. That's not like that they sold people a bill of goods thinking that would be a thing. You graduate college and you immediately get a job, that's entry level in a corporation or whatever. Like that was a myth, because I know so many people that's not the case for. And you pile vaccine mandates on top of that, it could get rough. And it's not a good, our hiring practices in this country aren't very good. And I don't think this vaccine stuff will improve that. Now, what's interesting, just to go back to the company I work for, in the town hall that I mentioned, they specifically said they would not ask during a hiring process about your vaccination status. They said they couldn't do that. So I guess that's their interpretation of HR law. And they're probably right, but HR law is routinely violated, unfortunately, or fortunately. I don't, depending on what type of law it is. But it's just one of those things that you can't ask, but a lot of people probably will at this point.
I was certainly asked about it. I got asked point blank if I was vaccinated, which took me a little bit just to even regroup enough to answer the question, and then I got indignant and answered the way I did. But yeah, I felt like I was violated in terms of that's my private business. Why should you care?
Yeah, and there's the whole thing. Like my company was also saying, don't disclose your vaccination status, like in a public forum. Just keep that within you and HR. Like, don't just blast that. So it was, again, like I'm surprised that they were, as liberal as they say they are. They were actually they seem very accommodating, despite the situation that they're in. So I'm actually pretty surprised by that. So our third option is entrepreneurship. That is your third option when faced with, losing your job or over a vaccine mandate, is you can start your own business and work for yourself. Now, two of the people here are self-employed, so they can tell you about that. But, this is always an option. And I want Christians to do this more, in my opinion. I think more Christians should be entrepreneurs. And I'm someone who wants to start 2 companies in the next 2 years. And that's an addition to the Evangelical Dark Web is technically a registered LLC. Not that it makes, like, the only reason that this is a profitable business is because I don't take any money from it. But other than that, it's technically a business. But I want to actually start 2 more businesses just outside of this. So definitely follow me around to check that out. But this is always an option that you have. There's a lot of success stories where people were fired from their jobs and then started a business, and that business took off. So this is the highest risk reward option. It is greatly customizable to your resources and capabilities. I recommend a no debt approach, whereby you prove your business concept before incrementally increasing your investment, and maintaining minimal fixed expenses and operate with as lean a balance sheet as possible. And then you got to think about what a profit enough to sustain a family actually means. And this shouldn't necessarily be assumed. A lot of businesses operate in the red before they turn a profit. And so these are just things you got to think about. And I actually did a live stream with Matt Williams on this way back a long time ago, like in January, where we talked about Christian entrepreneurship and starting a business. And he talked about how he recommended in this climate that's hostile to small businesses, going with a lean approach where you're not taking a whole lot of plant equipment and stuff like that. You're going lean on your assets, and then you're operating with only variable expenses, or as much as your expenses are as variable as possible. That means your variable expenses when your expense is tied to your income, your revenue. So that's what a variable expense is. So that is what he recommends. And I agree with that. In this environment, you do not want to be in debt, and you do not want to rely on so many have to pay so much in fixed expenses and stuff like that. But this is always an option. And, there's a lot of freedom that works for yourself in working for yourself that I'm sure you guys, Todd and Kyle, can explain better than I can.
Yeah, I will just add to what you said by also stating I think it's very important to find sustainable lifestyles in general, because let's just say, for instance, you could have a small hobby farm, and even if it's just a simple small farm for yourself and your family, well, that's money that you now don't have to put towards buying food at a grocery store. And especially with supply chains being so strained, I mean, that's not a bad idea. So it isn't just economical for the here and now, but it's also looking ahead to sustainability into the future. Now, that sounds a little bit like, okay, now I'm talking about different lifestyles and all that, but I'm going to bring it up because that's really what God intended for us. He wanted us to live agrarian lifestyles, and we just got so far away from that. And I'm sure some of us, if not all of us, live in suburbs or something where that's just not an option. You don't just go in your backyard and have a garden. But that's part of the problem. I didn't have a say. I was born in a suburb, a soulless suburb in sprawling America, and it really is not what I read about in the Bible. I don't read about, suburban sprawl. So let's get back to sustainable lifestyles to the degree that's realistic for us, or at least start getting the gears in motion, thinking about that, because I think that's going to become increasingly important. And not to mention health. I mean, it's going to be better for your health. Where your food is being grown. So economically, health-wise, sustainability for the economy in general, all the contributions in your community, it's all kinds of good. And so I would think about that at the same time as you're considering the items you just mentioned, Ray. I think those can work in tandem, and maybe even open up all kinds of new opportunities and doors. But we got to get out of this framework, like we're trying to dance around the devil's game here of like trying, how do we fight this in a court of law? I mean, we're on the losing end, guys. I mean, this is four guys on a chat on YouTube, and it's good, it's constructive, but I think we already lost this one, and if we think about it in terms of the future, what are we going to do now to take back control in our own lives? That can be as big or small as it may come, but I think we should be making strides for self-sustainability. And that's something that the individual has to examine. Like Ray, you can't look at my life and tell me what would be best for me. Only I can do that because only I know my circumstances. Same for you, Sean, and you, Todd. So that's kind of how I'm seeing this. I'm seeing this as the problem of COVID-19, the problem of vaccinations, the economic problems that will ensue, the supply chain bottlenecks. This is all just starting to ramp up. And we need to move away from the world system and more into self-sustainability. So I'm going to yield and let someone else run with that.
I don't know if you spoke, Todd, but otherwise, you said a lot of good things there that I'd love to comment on, but I'll let you go first if you want to.
Right now, I'm in the system. I rely on doing business with other businesses. But idea of becoming independent, or at least having a backup if this was not available to me, isn't fleshed out what that would look like. There's a degree of normalcy we're experiencing right now. Trying to keep that level of normalcy is what I'm working on right now. But being independent certainly helps. But, it also challenges certainly.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming out of a system that isn't set up for that. So that's where going to the Lord in prayer, I think, is going to be very important, especially poignant now because of those challenges that you cited, Todd. And I'm in a position where I feel pretty comfortable in my future, and I realize that I can be charitable in this discussion. Some people might have families, they might have things they're dealing with that seem very just cumbersome and complicated and maybe to a degree somewhat frightening. But this is what I think God is trying to get us to do with this quote unquote pandemic, because it's really highlighted just the fragility of our entire economy and our entire construct. I mean, COVID-19 is one example. We could have a solar flare tomorrow that could wipe out the grid, and then all heck breaks loose. And then what do we do? So it's not so much that we're going to for sure just change our lifestyle. It's going to be easy peasy and that's okay, great, Lord, let's go down this path instead. But I don't think there's any excuse for us not to be considering that, not to at least be thinking about that and finding realistic ways, and then, praying about it, saying, Lord, what do you want me to do to make small steps towards that kind of, so that decision has to really be made by the individual first, before that conversation with the Lord can take place, of course. So I think that's really what I would stress, just making that decision first in your conscience, and then going to the Lord in prayer and asking him, what steps realistically in my current situation, given the money I need to make. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, you always got to keep in mind your own financial situation before making a decision along your options here. Again, we haven't even gotten to the fourth option, which I think is somewhat similar to the third option of entrepreneurship. But I love what you said about agrarian lifestyle, because I do think in some degree that is what we were made to do. Now, again, be fruitful and multiply can have many applications. Well, not the multiply part, but the be fruitful part has many applications. And, you got to think of your family as like a business. And if your business has one client, which is, my business, or my, the company that I work for would be that client, and they pay me, and, I get all my money from one client. So, think about it like that. And one of the advantages of entrepreneurship in response to this is that you diversify your income, and that gives you more advantages. That makes you harder to cancel, to use that word. It makes you harder to cancel, and, therefore it makes you more sustainable. And as far as food goes, to touch up on that, like if I had more land, because I have like a small house and small plot of land, but it's what I can get in Maryland in these crazy real estate times. But if I had more, I would do hobby farming and rabbit farming, because that's just something I've always wanted to get in, or not always, but in the last few years I've always wanted to get into. It's just I don't have the capabilities of doing that, but it is something I want to strive to do later in life. Definitely when I move out of this place and get into another place, to do things like that, because there is something biblical about it for sure. And living independently, or as independent as you can, is certainly a good thing, especially when it comes to food supply, as meat prices are skyrocketing.
Yep.
Just things to think about for sure. And your rabbits are quiet, and their poop isn't as nasty as chickens, and it can be used for fertilizer. So
you've been thinking about this, Ray. I like that.
I've done a lot of research actually. Because again, so in college, the reason why I'm emphasizing entrepreneurship so much is because I actually have a degree in entrepreneurship, a subcategory of business administration. So, one of the business plans that I came up with involved rabbit farming. So is it a viable option? Well, I definitely think it's on the rise. And, when you look at the fact that 2 rabbits can produce a litter of 8 kits, and those kits become viable for eating in like weeks, that's pretty sustainable. Or is it 4 to 6 months, one or the other? But either way, it's, very sustainable. And, it's not like as nasty as, say, chickens, which are also good to have. And I hear farm-raised chickens taste really good. So I digress. But point being,
this is all good stuff, man. This is gold.
Yeah, it's good material. And point being, it's also healthier than chicken, actually. Yeah. It's actually really good for you.
Well, my grandfather raised chickens, so I understand the work going into raising chickens. So, oh man, that was a mess in the summers. It was hard work.
It's better than dairy farming.
No.
Yeah, I imagine. And
Ray,
then
you bring up a good point, in that we should be seeking out like-minded people, and believers should be looking to network and help each other out. You might have rabbits, and
someone else has goats.
I can make ammunition, and we can trade. And
that is awesome. That is a true bartering system, and that's actually another very biblical, godly thing. And I think just our infrastructure is just so far away from that right now that the ideas seem kind of alien to us, but it makes so much sense. And it honestly, just even having this conversation here just makes me feel good because it's getting closer to the earth, and um, this is what God intended,
Yeah.
We just have to
To
manage the
spread
world
out.
that we live in.
Well, we started in a garden and we're going back to a garden. So imagine that. There's
And
nothing
I
wrong.
think entrepreneurship is one way to get back to the garden. And again, here's your fourth option because it's kind of similar, but not. It's similar in the sense of you're working for yourself or you're taking a great risk. And that's running for office because there is an election coming up in most states in 2022 will be their gubernatorial state local elections. And, local offices, if you're fired from your job for not refusing a vaccine mandate, I think that story resonates with a lot of people. Now, obviously, this is not a viable solution. This is not viable for everyone. If you live in a Branch Covidian community, don't even bother. But as far as political offices like local county commissioners, mayors, they pay like 40,000 plus a year. So it's not a terrible option. And, you can make a real difference in your community. So I think that's an option that's distinct from finding a new job and entrepreneurship. So I just wanted to mention that. Especially since that opportunity is coming up right now, especially since we have so many sheriffs that I believe failed our country, so many county executives or commissioners. I'm using Maryland terms here because I guess most other people have like mayors and stuff, and I don't know what they do at county levels, but Maryland's big on counties. That just failed their communities. Mayors, I don't know how much power a mayor has, but again, in other states and other places,
They have enough power to mess stuff up. How about that?
Exactly. So, and if you stood up for yourself against the vaccine, I think as a voter, that story resonates, and that'll resonate with some people for sure, and just depends on whether there's enough of those some people in a given community. So you got to think that one through, but it's an option worth mentioning. But yeah, again, if you live in like Branch Covidian Haven, don't even bother, in my opinion. But if you live in a place where this is possible, yeah, Todd, yeah. But if you live in a place where this is possible, where pushback is popular, then you have a shot. So
Yeah, I'm liking the conversation here over on the side. If you're reading that,
yeah, the chat.
Yeah,
this is a very energetic chat tonight.
Well, this is actually really encouraging. What's coming through here, and yeah, so I'll let you read that. But yeah, I think you're totally right, Ray, with entrepreneurship. And the more, I don't like the word power because that makes it sound like we want power, but the more power we can take it back into our own hands, the way our country was originally founded, the intentions of the founding fathers, I think that's going to solve a lot of these problems. I mean, the federal government has been given so much power largely due to people wanting things, not wanting things taken away, and then people just being ignorant, just not understanding the Constitution and how that's been eroded, feeling so discouraged with the whole process that they just kind of throw their hands in the air and walk away. But we need to take back control as much as possible. And if that is running for local office, boy, I definitely think it's going to be from the bottom up. It's not going to be top down anymore. The top down is just, the presidency, you have to bow down to so many altars to even, to become a congressman. Just think of that. So
yeah,
if you can do it at the local level, more power to you. I'm probably not going to do it, but that's me. If we had more believers who created a climate in politics that was more conducive to other believers, then that would be awesome. Yes. So that's a whole nother realm, but we have such a wicked satanic government right now, guys. And I don't know, I think it's just really great that we're even having this conversation.
Yeah, and even exists at a local level. Loudoun County, Virginia, may be a national embarrassment, but it's not like that same mentality doesn't exist everywhere else.
Right.
So you're seeing in Wyoming that they're imposing a mask mandate on schools, and this 16-year-old junior in high school was arrested and escorted out in handcuffs in Wyoming. I mean, this is one of the most conservative states in the country, minus the fact that they have Liz Cheney in Congress. But other than that, this is one of the most conservative states in the country, and I don't even think they locked down. I could be wrong on that, but they might have been one of the few states that didn't impose a mask mandate or anything like that, but they're doing it in school. It's like, I don't like put biblical people in office there, because I am at but all this stuff, these people, these principalities and powers, the spirit of the age has power in these places, like Wyoming of all places.
Yeah.
So
well, there's an argument.
Christians need to rise up everywhere.
There's the argument, like you said, Ray, to keep it local. And one of the things that I'm seeing across the country is that, man, there's a power being on a school board. Our school boards are littered with Marxists and socialists and people that are nefarious. So it really is kind of like we used to say, and I played baseball, everybody wants to swing for the fence, but man, if you can lay it on an awesome bunt and get on base, you're on base. So you got to play small ball so you can control the greater situation.
Nah, everyone has launch angle mentality, and it's just they don't recognize it.
My local town has made the national news a few times for opposing the BLM and the Pride movement being pushed by the educators in the school itself, and the level of pushback from the enemy has just been remarkable. I mean, not surprising, but it certainly was the new members of the school board that were opposing these ungodly programs in the school, and they've the cancel culture, the harassment, but they are godly people standing up and doing the right thing. But it's a very challenging process, not without its setbacks and difficulties, but it's worth the fight.
Yeah, and just along those lines, because you made me think of just the whole idea of getting canceled and politicians standing up, and then they get a lot of pushback. I don't know if you saw the story about the lieutenant governor of North Carolina, who basically said, I don't want this stuff taught in schools. And he doesn't want specifically homosexuality and transgenderism taught in schools, and he called it filth. And he was speaking at a church, and he didn't back down from that. And the thing about the woke mob is they smell weakness.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And if you are weak, they know it, and they come after you. If they sense that you will break, they will come after you harder. If you give in, if you make it known that you're not going to break, they're not going to come after you to cancel you. They're going to go after the people around you to try to cancel them for not canceling you.
Yeah, you have to care about getting canceled to feel the threat.
Exactly. And, just remember that if you consider running for office as a option, or starting your own business as an option, it certainly applies to all the options when you're finding a new job or you're fighting the vaccine mandate in your own workplace. The more, if they sense weakness in you, they will push harder. But if they do not, they're going to back up a little bit and reassess whether or not they're going to do this. That's why, make them pull the trigger. Don't fall on your sword is something that we kind of said tonight.
Sean, didn't you say one time in a podcast that when you kneel to BLM or whatever, that you're actually giving Satan authority to destroy you? Because I love when you said that. I mean, that was just spot on.
We were talking about what happened in Houston, being in the Texas market north of Houston, what happened when they had the huge George Floyd, memoriam downtown, and every fake, phony, and false pastor and teacher and preacher from anywhere showed up. And I remember making the comment, and I got a lot of heat for it because, people that have the melanin color that I do were upset because I said Jesus would not go to that event, and he would say, let the dead bury their dead, you follow me. And oh boy, why did I say that? And because at the end of the day, everybody was bowing, taking a knee at the George Floyd Memorial. I'm like, that's like taking a knee and bowing before Satan. That's exactly what it means. We're gonna agree with the spirit of the age. And it was just literally thousands of people in downtown Houston bowing at the George Floyd Memorial. It was wicked and it was ungodly. So thanks for remembering that, Kyle. But I remember that was almost a year and a half ago, and I got a lot of heat for that one.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I'm on the other end of it. I'm on the Minneapolis end of the George Floyd thing. So we both experienced our own sort of versions of that whole catastrophe. And, I've seen some things with the younger people, younger generations that I won't get into right now, but lack of discernment and lack of wanting the truth and self-deception, I think, is the biggest threat right now. Mm-hmm. And the scary thing about self-deception is that you don't, meaning the person who's being deceived is deceiving themselves. They don't see it coming. They don't see what's coming. That's why it's called self-deception, because you're being deceived. You're willfully turning off the ability for yourself to see the truth. I mean, it doesn't get any more dangerous. I mean, that's the threat of damnation right there. So, but I see that a lot.
And you're right, Ray.
With
you can't let them smell weakness. That is, you just cannot back up. I mean, they're going to bark like a dog on a chain, but you know what? When that dog gets off the chain and comes out the yard, it's the biggest coward ever.
Yeah, I mean, look at Drew Brees is to me the quintessential. They smelt weakness, so they went after him hard multiple times. He backed down multiple times. When you apologize for participating in Bring Your Bible to School Day, like, dude, you might as well just stop trying at this point if you're gonna apologize for something so blatantly benign and just stuff like that. And then, of course, he would put. Well, it wasn't George Floyd. It was one of the people after him that was like attempting, like Jacob Blake, I believe. He put that on his helmet or something like that. And it's like, doesn't he have a daughter? It's just such a wrong mentality. And they smelt weakness hard, and he capitulated so hard. And, just to round up our four options here, and again, you can fight the exemption in your workplace, lawsuits and all that. Obviously, these are options that you go to if you're not your religious exemption isn't being accepted or anything like that. You can find a new job. That's always an option. You can start your own and work for yourself, be an entrepreneur. That is an option as well. And you can always run for office because, those offices do pay, but I think that's a distinct category from the other three. And it's worth mentioning. And none of these are mutually exclusive options. You can start your own business while you're looking for a new job. You can start your own business while you're fighting someone. You can run for office while you're being an entrepreneur, and you can run for office while you're fighting for this. You can do all these things, or you can do multiple of these things at once. So just keep that in mind. These aren't mutually exclusive solutions for you. So next, if you lose the fight, if you do find yourself short on income, I think we touched on the issue of going on unemployment, receiving government benefits, and you should not have the mentality that you want to stay on the check forever. If you need to do it, get on it for a little while and try to get off of it as soon as you can, because it's unbiblical for you to stay on it more than you need to. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Maybe you disagree on the whether we should take it or not. I understand if you do. The point that I'm making is that if the government imposed vaccine mandate is what's causing you to lose your job, for you to then take government money is not as morally wrong as I don't think if you think it's wrong to take unemployment, that you would feel that it's as wrong to take unemployment when the government is the reason why you're taking unemployment.
And one of the greater evils, and everyone forgets about this, is one of the sad things that this administration did back in March of 2021 is they kind of silently launched the CARES Act. And the CARES Act actually perpetuated the problem that we're seeing, where the government decided that, hey, if you don't want to work, you can stay home. And a large portion of our workforce just stopped working because they were at home collecting a check. I have never sat at home since I was 16
Yeah, and
waiting for
Sean,
somebody
they were
to pay
giving
to give me money.
they were giving people more money to stay home.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it wasn't like a little bit less money or even the same. They were actually paying people more. We'll talk about a lack of incentive.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
I agree with you, Ray. You know, it's no shame in having to take unemployment as that stopgap. But man, we have certainly, this administration has perpetuated this socialist mentality. Let us take care of you, but they're always priming for their agenda. And the last thing I'll say on that, I had a client that told me they were running a technical college and they had the largest number of students cancel at the beginning of this year because they were making more money sitting at home and weren't incentivized to finish their education. It was a very sad thing to hear.
Interesting chats about this that I wanted to highlight while you were talking. And again, I think there's not a clear biblical verse against doing this, so I think it's permissible. But remember, there is a line between what is permissible and what is good. And I think, if you're trying to stay on it longer, then it's not good. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, your mindset should be to not be on it. And then if you have to go on it, it's there as a safety net.
Yeah.
Right. So another thing to talk about is you lose your income, you are likely also going to lose health insurance. Now, that's just something to be mindful of. Now, I believe healthcare is temporarily portable because of the HIPAA, which doesn't mean a whole lot these days. But as far like the P in HIPAA, it actually stands for portability. So the idea is that you can kind of take your healthcare somewhere else, or at least temporarily, I think. So that's something you can do. COBRA, all these other acronyms out there. But just remember, if you make under 400% FPL, which is federal poverty line, if you make under 400%, you can qualify for advanced premium tax credits to pay for your healthcare premiums. And they can also pay dental premiums, I believe, as well. Losing your coverage counts as a life event for a special enrollment period, regardless of the time of year. So these are just something to keep in mind. Yeah, it's not ideal, but
we have an interesting comment. Yeah, Innovative HQ in the comments says there might eventually impose higher taxes on the unvaxxed, denying medical care. Something is going on in some places, and that might come to the U.S. very soon. Innovative
I'm
IQ,
starting to see that right now.
Interesting thought. That's an interesting thought.
And, it's literally medical apartheid for sure. And again, it's a complete violation of the Hippocratic Oath. And it'll be interesting to see whether any state legislators want to push back on that. Maybe a vaccine mandate ban applies to this situation as well, because that is, again, it's a violation of the Hippocratic Oath and everything we understand about medicine to deny someone care because of their own personal choices. Like, you don't do that with obesity. You don't do that with smoking. You don't do that with drunk driving. You don't do that with self-inflicted gunshot wounds or anything like that. You don't deny someone care because of why they're in there. That's not the purpose of a doctor. But you're starting to see that.
Doctors don't take the Hippocratic Oath any longer.
Wow.
And you're starting to see that a lot of this is really a crisis of how we deal with healthcare situation, how we deal with treating COVID rather than COVID itself. And that's the great shame of it all. Like, it's not so much about the disease, it's about our refusal to treat it. And that's the biggest, that should be a huge concern to everyone. And one of the things that I'm about to do, because I haven't done it, because I wanted to do this before this stream, was promote places where you can find treatment options for COVID-19. I won't go into too many details, but I was going to aggregate on the Evangelical Dark Web.org/hub. I was going to aggregate resources that provide early treatment. So the last subject that I wanted to cover was schools. And just as a last call for alcohol type of message, if you have any questions for us, because we're going to do a Q&A afterwards, so just send your questions in now so there's not a dead air moment. So if you have questions, we'll take them after this section. But we're going to talk about schools, and there's two things to talk about with schools: public schools, and then colleges and universities. And I think with public schools, I don't think we should comply with public school mandates at all. Like, I believe California is the first state trying to test this, and I just say call their bluff. So let me know if you guys have a different thought about that, because I just say call California Gavin Newsom's bluff on requiring vaccine mandates for children who become eligible for COVID-19 vaccine. I don't think they'll be able to enforce that if parents say no.
Mm-hmm.
And
he's become quite spry since the recall fake elections. He all of a sudden we've got a brand new Gavin Newsom who is basically trying to pass every wicked thing he can pass. So yeah, you just got to stand up to him. He's a bully.
Oh, you don't get on top of a one-party state by not being a bully. It just doesn't happen. And just a comment on mask mandates. Schools in my area kind of see that as a disciplinary issue, as far as I can tell from what I've gathered, because I don't have school-age children. But from what I gather, these schools are treating it like a disciplinary issue if parents refuse a mask mandate. So I imagine a vaccine mandate would just be the same thing. So if you send your kids to school without a mask or a vaccine, they might just quarantine them off or treat it as a disciplinary issue. But I don't know if they'll actually escalate to suspending or expelling kids for it. That'd be interesting.
It's absolutely disgusting what's happening. I mean, it's hard to even have the conversation like a normal conversation, because there's all these thoughts racing through my mind as we talk about this. And I think the writing has been on the wall for a long, long time. The public schooling system has been in decline my entire life. So, I mean, it's the idea that it's going to get worse is not a new idea. It's not going to get better. And now we have the COVID-19 just mess and federal overreach coming into the picture, which we didn't have. And we had propaganda in the schooling system, but not from a medical standpoint with the pandemic, quote unquote pandemic. So again, I mean, I would just, if you have kids, think about private school, think about homeschool, consider it.
There are more options than ever for this.
Yeah.
And Kyle, I have to tell you, I'm going to tell my age here, and I think Todd will agree. We knew the beginning of the end is when they stopped airing Schoolhouse Rock. You might not know about that, but you should Google Schoolhouse Rock. When they stopped airing Schoolhouse Rock, that was the beginning of the end.
Correct me if I'm wrong. That show was like a Disney cartoon, right?
No, it was a learning commercial segment that taught about the Constitution and math,
it was
spelling.
A commercial segment? I know what Schoolhouse Rock is. I just thought it was created by Disney back when Disney actually made patriotic cartoons.
Yeah, Sean, I remember seeing that as a kid. They purchased
it, but they weren't behind it.
Okay.
Yeah, they purchased it so we couldn't air it. That's what they did.
Exactly.
Well, if you can't make IP, buy it and ruin Star Wars.
Right.
So
which they did ruin Star Wars. Let's not get into that.
Let's not get into it. But
that's a different town hall, guys.
And then colleges, don't apply to a college that wants to apply one. I think that's pretty simple advice. Like, colleges are a dime a dozen. There's 5,000 colleges in the country. I'm sure you can find one that's both affordable and doesn't want to impose this on you. Obviously, a lot of Christian parents push community college, and for good reason. Mm-hmm. And I recommend that. And I don't think college is becoming increasingly more important. I think it's becoming increasingly less important. And the only reason jobs are really requiring it is because they assume everyone's got a degree, but they'll prefer the experience over the degree, in my observation. So that's why you see colleges be like entry-level job, 3 years experience. required, which doesn't make sense. So that's just an observation. And the amount of people I know that have degrees but don't have jobs that, degrees work, that they don't have jobs befitting of a degree is just outstanding. And it's shocking, and it's not easy to get into the industry. Like, I got my job not because I have a degree, but because I got my foot in the door because I know someone. And I turn out not to be bad at it. I can learn things. I can learn how to do IT and testing software. I can learn how to do that. And then I've seen people from other industries not be able to learn it. But, how you get your foot into the door, since we are talking about job markets here, is not something to be ashamed of. A lot of times it is who you know, not what you know. And that has no determination on your work ethic or your ability to learn a job competently. So just keep that in mind. Networking is always a good thing.
Yeah, I think there are many options now. In fact, the interesting dichotomy of the conversation is that as pessimistic as my outlook is on certain areas, I'm actually really optimistic in other areas. Like, I feel like you could do just about anything right now in the world. I mean, people are looking for skilled workers, and I mean, it's going to take maybe some innovation, but that's really what we should have been doing to begin with. I mean, it shouldn't have taken a pandemic to come around to force us out of our slumber to do something different, So I'm actually kind of optimistic in this area. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I'm a little optimistic as well, because I think we are starting to push the tide on this. Like, I think in a lot of ways we kind of beat critical race theory in the church. Like, we got it so out in the open that it's such a proxy issue now.
Yeah.
So I think we can do that with this issue as well. And that's definitely one of the ultimate goals of the this town hall, is certainly equip people and just say, hey, churches shouldn't be participating in this whatsoever. They should actually be helping believers navigate these situations. So I lost my train of thought. If someone wants to jump in,
Let me jump in here. So Z06 Stingray 18 asked a question: have you guys been satisfied by the church leadership during these times in your area? So to answer Stingray, no, because they have not really spoken up. It's business as usual for most of them. They're just concerned about the tithe. They're more concerned about their me evangelism that they do. And I don't think God really cares about the construct of a church. I think he cares about people meeting and assembling, forsake not the assembling of yourselves. But in terms of these edifices, for the most part, most of them are just, it can be on the scrap heap. I mean, it's a rare find. I mean, Ray has a pastor. I can trust the fact that Ray would not go to that church unless that pastor was actually proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ. But that is such a rare thing. We have churches on every corner, but not every single church on the corner actually proclaims the gospel. And if anybody can tell me in the area that they're satisfied, then name one pastor that that's going to go in a pulpit day in, day out, week in and week out, and preach the gospel according to what Paul and Peter and Jesus said. They just don't do that. They're just completely narcissistic in their approach, and the focus is on having their best life now. So yeah, it's discouraging. My family and I have not walked into a church building since 2016, and that's sad, because I'm a person that loves the Bible. We love the Lord, but it's an indictment when we go to seeker-friendly churches, Stingray, and all we get is the same old blah blah blah. It's just sad.
I feel
blessed. I'll let you speak, Kyle.
No, that was Todd.
I see that.
Todd, my bad.
I see that locally, as the majority of the churches, to some degree, have allowed the governor to become the head of the church and not the Lord. And but my particular church, we rented public buildings, but we moved out of the city limits into the countryside into a two-sided barn with all the weather issues. And so I feel very fortunate that we have not stopped meeting as Christ commanded us, except for while we were looking for a new place to meet. So we kind of feel like the underground church to some degree. but so many churches have gone back and forth and had to twist scripture and just really bend the knee to be able to continue to hold church. And it was really disappointing to see that in our local community. As Ray pointed out in so many of his podcasts, that they have added to the law of God and to the gospel and become legalistic and really tried to make excuses for things that they should not be teaching and participating in. But we have sister churches in our area that feel as we do and have not succumbed to the branch Covidianism. And I just see this as one of the steps along the way to the great falling away, where many of the churches will become irrelevant, that they will forsake their first love. So I would encourage everyone listening to find a church that
and one of the resources that I push to find a church is discerningchristians.com. That's like an initiative of John Harris, and I've pushed that on Evangelical Dark Web.org/hub. That's like the first thing is finding a church. And I can testify that's a good experience. Again, I had to look for a church because I was pretty much churchless for a while, because it's rough out there. It's rough. It's like you hear about how rough the dating pool is. The church pool is pretty rough too. And and you live in Texas, so you shouldn't even have the Branch Covidian issues. But I guess Texas has a large mega church culture, from what I gather.
Yes,
and
it's quite
they have their own issues.
Gross. It's quite gross.
I want to say Oklahoma's worse in that regard, but
oh yeah, Branson. Yeah, Branson. You go to Branson, that's like the hub of heresy.
But even in Maryland, it's just there are a lot of conservative churches, but where was their praxis when the time was needed? And you didn't really see that, and that's the great shame. And I feel like a lot of people share that, and I think a lot of the churches that are emerging right now, like out of the result of this, are going to have like an underground type model for operating. And I go to something like that. Yeah, and it's not even close to my house either. So, we can talk about how far you're willing to drive to go to church, but for me, it's about the distance on a good morning of commuting.
Mm-hmm.
So half hour away. And, I don't know what the furthest someone would drive to a church is, or how long it would take. But, these are questions you should ask yourself. I think any believer should ask themselves if they're in a search, because, again, it's rough out there, and, you got to do what you can. And I did remember my train of thought from before, and I just want to circle back about the optimism that I kind of have, and then we'll go through this Q&A that's being submitted. So, two of you look like Gen X males, so I'm sure you're familiar with the movie Fight Club. And, while we shouldn't quite talk about that, that movie was kind of about an underground cult of men, aimless men who are apparently infiltrating all these areas of society. And to some degree, I'm trying to draw a parallel to how a lot of these people who are refusing the vaccine are, and, how Christians kind of operate in a society. We're like those men in Fight Club without the Project Mayhem, but we're actually spreading the gospel, and we're making a difference in that sort of way. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing on this. And that's what we got to be doing in societies, is Project Gospel, and just infiltrate these organizations, spread the gospel, and make change within. And as far as fighting vaccine mandates, like the same way as well. And if that means that you call in sick and now a bunch of people can't make their flights, so be it. Project saying no to vaccine mandates. So just think, just draw a parallel. And the fact that you're seeing some of this, you're seeing Project Mayhem happen in real life. It's kind of interesting, and it might take people aback. It might stop people from imposing unlawful, unbiblical mandates.
Yeah, and I think there are more people out there who do have a really strong backbone when it comes to this stuff, but they just kind of stay silent. See, the church, at least if it's doing its job, should be somewhat at the forefront of these issues when they arise. But I think there's a large majority of people who, they just may not have the ability or the forum or the decorum or whatever word you want to use to be out there and like speaking out against it. But when push comes to shove, and it's like, okay, you're faced with a decision where you can either keep your job or go on strike effectively. Many of them will probably make the right decision. They'll probably just say, well, no, forget you. I'll just see how you do without me. But see, we're just beginning to see that now, because up until a mandate was enforced, there really wasn't a reason for a lot of people to take that stand. So now we're seeing it where push is coming to shove. And so we're seeing how people are reacting when they're actually being forced to do something. Like, how does all the political stuff that's been going on for the last 15 years in our country affect us sitting in our living room? When does that actually start to affect me personally? Once we start to see that, then I think you're going to see more common folk, so to speak, stand up and be like, no, that ain't right. No. And the church has, I think, been negligent in being at the forefront of the issue. That's the problem. They were too complicit, and it didn't surprise me, honestly.
Like, I mean, when you see the hill to die on, you're left fighting on precarious terrain, and I think that's the situation we're finding ourselves in.
Yeah.
So I think we're ready to move on to some Q&A. So here's a question. Did you see how Governor of New York, whose name I forget, was in a mega church preaching Branch Covidianism, saying that it's God's will that you get the vaccine? What an apostate church. I actually did a video on that. Did you? So I saw that. I don't know if you guys saw that as well, but
I saw it.
I believe that's a mega church in Brooklyn. That's kind of like an event hall. And again, the church situation in New York is not great. However, I do want to give a shout out to, was it Providence Baptist Church, I believe, was in New York City, and they were dropping these leaflets on college campuses that were angering all the right people. So I do want to give a shout out to that church, for being a light in a very dark place. But you get a lot of churches in New York that, they operate as entertainment. Like, I've actually been to some of these churches. Like, I've actually been to Hillsong NYC once, several years ago. And, that's a interesting experience, I guess. And then Brooklyn Tabernacle, which is, it's a touristy attraction. And that's what we were. So I've been to these places, and that's what that church was that she was speaking at was kind of like, so. Oh, okay, we already answered that question. There was another question I saw in the chat. And okay, maybe there wasn't. Well, if there's no more questions, if you guys have any parting words.
This Z06 Stingray 18 is absolutely on fire tonight. I was trying to he or she said something else about, people need to be willing to move out of the cities and the country back to rural lifestyle. I mean, that was awesome. We never even got around to commenting on that. But then this one, I've seen an overall enslavement of people, both in business and in church, by their paychecks and lifestyle, unwilling to sacrifice for their beliefs and convictions. I mean, amen. That's just straight up stuff that it's like, let's stop being all nicey nice with this and just be honest. Like, people just don't want to give up anything. It's like these times are radical, and I think we just have to have a backbone but not forget that it's all rooted in prayer. Like, that's the thing. If we just are out here solo on a battlefield fighting all these crazy things, well, we're going to lose that fight. But God is on our side. We just have to consult him. So amen to Z016 or 18. This is just some.
Yeah,
That's
again,
good
David
stuff.
and Goliath is not really an underdog story because Goliath was opposing God.
Right.
So that's just something to keep in mind.
Exactly.
Right.
COVID-19 ain't got nothing, guys.
And one of the points that I've made repeatedly against, or I don't want to say against the church because I am for the church, and a lot of these people didn't even want to suffer an ounce for the faith, not even an ounce. Like what's the most that they could? They're not actually threatening you with burning at the stake or lighting you on fire as candles around the Colosseum. They're not doing anything close to that. And no one not enough people were willing to suffer for the faith, even an ounce. Like, the Gospel Coalition types, criticize the church for having a persecution complex, but while denying when actual persecution takes place. But the paradox is that, people don't want to suffer for the faith in this country, even when there is persecution. So, the persecution complex doesn't exist because people aren't willing to suffer an ounce.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a really good point.
And Mark Epps wanted to give a shout out to, I guess, his pastor, Pastor Ron Tucker. So we'll give him a shout out as well. And
Yes.
Okay, it looks like we got one more question from our favorite chatter, I guess. When will churches focus more on stronger families? Scripture is critical, but families are falling apart around us, and it's impossible to fight without them. Well, again, this goes back to the idea of sphere sovereignty, and you got to have your institutions that recognize their jurisdiction and cooperate with one another. So, I don't know about how churches do or aren't focusing on families. So I guess anyone else can speak more greater to that.
I think the destruction of the family is the number one issue in this country. I think that's number one, because you don't have these moral travesties if you have strong family units. It's the undermining of God's system in the strong family unit, even if it's not necessarily always overt. It's just in television, in entertainment, in media. Sean, you know about media, having experienced that and seen that from the inside, just eroding away at that has created so many problems in our country. And what Satan really wants to do is he wants to destroy the family first.
Yeah, then he can destroy the church and then government, and that's the chain that you're saying. It kind of goes back to that saying that culture isn't politics and culture, and whether there's a stream and what's uphill or downstream for another. And it's really, if the people are unbiblical and unfaithful, the policies will reflect that, especially in a democratic system, where in the Bible you see that they had kings and that these kings were actually moral representatives. Like, they were a proxy for how moral or immoral the people were. So when you had someone like Josiah, he was bringing about the reform, and the people were actually having a revival. He was symbolic of that. So,
yeah.
But when you
said that policies are a reflection of it. That's really the key takeaway with this, because we like to look at the church and ourselves sometimes, and I'm being critical of us here, just the church in general, as victims, where we brought a lot of this on ourselves because we live in this country and because the church didn't speak up. See, it's not a surprise that any of this is happening. At least it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody in the church, because we live in a system where looking out for your fellow man, the society today does not encourage goodwill towards men. Okay, so why would we all of a sudden just miraculously have politicians that embody those principles? I mean, it's, when you think about it, it's absurd to expect that. So of course we're going to have politicians that are wicked. That's a conclusion we should have had right out of the gate. And so we should have been planning for this, expecting this, and then, hey, if it doesn't happen, then that's great, right? But if it happens, you want to be ready for it. You want to be prepared for it. So
I think this question from Bill bleeds right into this question we're just discussing: how to persuade pastors to speak more about family values versus arcane Bible study trivia. Now, I was at a Bible camp once, and literally the only scriptural reference in that entire sermon, because there was nightly sermons, it was a mission camp, was an arcane Bible study trivia. I believe it was who Moses' wife was. But other than that, didn't go to the book at all. So we didn't like that. We didn't take too kindly to that sermon, if you could call it that. But again, I don't have too much experience. You know, a lot of times how I've seen people speak about Bible family values is trivial or trite. So I don't know if you guys have more to add on that.
Well, it would be very helpful if pastors from the pulpit would talk about the biblical protocol of a family, which seems to be lost on so many. You know, we have God and Jesus who answers to the Father, and the man who answers to Jesus who's empowered by the Holy Spirit. And then he has his wife at the side. But when you have what I call shuffled authority, and let's say the wife or the woman is the primary churchgoer, when that protocol gets out of whack, that's one of the tools that the Satan uses often to just get the whole family unit out of it, because you've got the woman dragging everybody to church or taking the lead role. So, if biblical protocol is not being taught across the pulpit, it becomes a huge problem. And it's just a festering problem that gives Satan so much energy to cause other problems.
And what you said was actually reminds me of an interesting point about how a lot of churches kind of preach to women.
Yes.
And,
yeah,
when you talk about women dragging their families to church, like when like I heard someone say that when the father attends church, the children will attend church, are more likely to attend church. But the father doesn't attend church and the mother does, it doesn't translate to the children continuing in any church, being churched at all. I thought that was an interesting thing that I heard once, and I'm sure there's data to back that up, because every Father's Day churches will regale us with the importance of fathers, because evangelical churches be like that. But man, I'm sure stuff like that will come up. But we hear about that stuff, but in a daily weekly in and out, again, when you call men to be men, you're going to get a lot of times things that churches might not like, which is questions or why aren't we doing something?
Yeah, and another thing Satan wants to do is he wants to undermine the male role and subjugate males. And so, see, this is all Satan's strategy. We got to be, Sean, you had a quote one time that I logged, and I'm going to see if I can get it right. If I don't, you can correct me and say it the right way. But you said sometimes we have to be gentle like sheep, but wise like serpents.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Scripture.
and that's so important, because Christians like to play kind of like I want to say this nicely. I don't know if I can, but it's like we just need to be stronger and wiser. We know the devil is smart. We know that he never sleeps. We know that he's constantly working against us. He's our eternal adversary. I mean, so we shouldn't be surprised that these tactics are being used. We need to be ready for them. And so the family thing to me is the hierarchy, or the family structure, and the undermining of the family structure is the beginning, and all the other dominoes fall after that. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing the other dominoes fall because divorce rates like more than 50%. So There you go.
Well, and coming from a media background, one of the things that I try to share with some of our audience is that all you have to do is go back and follow the sitcoms. The older sitcoms, Father Knows Best, well, a little better structure, a little more biblical structure. But you get to the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the father became the butt of the joke, becomes the buffoon. He's not the smart one. He's just a, money bag. The kids disrespect him. The wife disrespect him. So it's been a slow drip. It's always a slow drip. And then we wonder why fathers or men are not respected. And of course, men, we got to earn respect. Just because we're a male figure doesn't mean that they should give us respect. But when you remove God out of the equation, no one's going to win. The biggest weakness in the church is the vacuous space that's missing from godly men. I'm not saying perfectly men, but men that at least will acknowledge that God is first and that God is a priority regardless of our sinfulness and our brokenness. And that message doesn't get taught. So what happens is you get into a church, and as our friend Stingray say, yes, church is for chicks. Well, you've got pastors that actually love to preach and teach to the weak-willed women. And I mean, they're emotional. They're completely different than we are. And so we have this 90-10 thing. 90% of the women, the people in the church, or 10% men. It's a weird dynamic. But if you have a church where it's 50-50, man, that's a thriving church, because now you have the kids that are seeing what leadership is and the whole construct of what it means to have elders and deacons. I mean, the whole construct of how a church should operate from a New Testament standpoint has been completely tossed out the door. And then you have these pastors basically that are the CEOs of their little enterprises or their ministries. And the constructs are, I don't think God really likes the Western church. I don't think he likes how we set it up. Especially when we know that the scriptures are being completely ignored because everybody's preaching about your best life now rather than the one that's coming. We need to get ready for the one that's coming, not worry about what's going on in 2021.
For Joel Osteen, his best life might be now. So
it is his. This is best it's going to get.
I don't know how to answer this because I don't know about Robert Jeffress's pathway to victory. I don't actually know that. I don't know if you guys do. As far as I heard somewhere that Robert Jeffress was shilling for the vaccine.
Well, I'll speak to that because I did a video that got pulled down from YouTube, and it had to do with Billy Graham and Robert Jeffress promoting that it's a Christian thing for it's a biblical thing for Christians to get the mandate, and that Jesus would actually get the vaccine. It was the most atrocious thing I'd ever heard. The fact is, I didn't actually tell on them. I actually ran video and audio of them saying it. And of course, the tech tyrants pulled it down. So I put the video over on Minds because they would actually post it and not pull it down. But no, they are. It was called Christian propaganda, Christian vaccine propagandists. That was the name of the video. And both, not Billy Graham, but his Franklin Graham and Robert Jeffress both were proponents for Christians getting the vaccine. It was just atrocious. And their words, not my words.
And it's a shame that maybe not Robert Jeffress is like your quintessential moral majority figure. And then Franklin Graham is certainly your quintessential evangelical pastor or evangelist. And that's true when God's not dead. You have the one Muslim girl from the Muslim family that's listening to Franklin Graham's sermons like, are you kidding me? But I think I called that a Big Eva youth movie. But and that was one of the reasons that I came to that conclusion, is because they're pushing him like come on. But so I didn't know how to quite answer that question because I don't listen to megachurch pastors unless I have to for things like this.
I want to bring up when you guys were talking. I was just looking up this verse because I couldn't remember where it was. Just going back, but 2 Timothy 3:6-7. That lines up with what we were talking about before. So we can post that up. But for this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with diverse lusts, ever learning and never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. So there you go. I mean, there's biblical precedent for what we're saying. And so I did want to highlight that because I think that that's important. But
Yeah.
put that up there. So I don't know.
Well, we are approaching 2.5 hours. This is a little longer than I thought we would go, and I think we've answered all the questions. And I think we covered just about every area. Maybe not every micro area, but like every general area that people are going to face, and with the vaccine mandate, in various industries that are a little more niche, like federal contractors, that no one really focuses on that issue. Healthcare workers, and then U.S. servicemen, which have limited options in this situation compared to most, and then everyone else. So I think we covered everything, and we talked about religious exemptions and questions to ask employers and your options to fight back. So I just want to kind of recap that, and I want to let everyone know that my show notes, which a lot of it I read out loud, will be published following this stream's conclusion. And just wanted to part by saying that the goal of this was to be useful. The goal of this was to equip and edify believers, to not sell out their convictions for a paycheck, to not get something that they believe is unhealthy or immoral to take, and to help them stay strong in these trying times. So this is probably the most hyped event I've done, and I didn't hype it up too much, but I hyped it up a lot for things that I do, and for a reason, because I believe that this was super important. And this isn't just about tearing people down; it's about building up believers. And that's the whole point of what we do. And Evangelical Dark Web, the whole purpose of the dark web part kind of stems from the intellectual dark web, where you're kind of taking these people like a Joe Rogan, who I guess is the only person on the intellectual dark web I actually really care for, because I don't really care about the other ones. They're willing to listen to all these perspectives, and as evangelicals, I want to listen to different perspectives within that, because this is an echo chamber. We want to actually hear different perspectives on this issue, contrarians and whatnot. So that's all I gotta say, and that's why I put on this. If you guys have any parting words.
Yeah, I'll offer a closing statement here. Sometimes I hesitate to bring up some of the really radical stuff, like moving out of the cities and seeking out a more agrarian lifestyle stuff, because I think it just makes me sound strange, and I do want people to listen and absorb what it is I'm saying. But some of it can be intimidating, and so again, you got to consult God on it. Don't do it yourself. God wants to help, but also remember, God will meet you where you are. He's not asking us to buy a pair of overalls and become a farmer overnight, or a chicken farmer, or raising rabbits or anything. I mean, who knows where it's going to lead, right? But that's part of the fun. But just he'll meet you where you're at, and it's the small disciplines that we do first. Like, it may be as simple as just not turning on the TV. That might be the very first step. But back to what Stingray said earlier in the comments, which I just loved, is that people don't want to make any kinds of sacrifices. And we have to be willing, because we are the church. The judgment comes upon us first. So we have to be willing to face this head on and make some sacrifices, but also do that understanding that God is he's not going to make us do something that we're not capable of doing. And so let's take some peace in that he's not requiring us to be different people than who we are today, but making small strides, small disciplines, and just being open-minded, really, about, hey, what can I do different in my life that's a little more godly? That makes me a little more separate from the world. That makes me a little bit more conducive to what's going on right now and what we're trying to achieve here with not taking this vaccine, not being complicit. So that's what I would stress, and either of you two can take it.
I just want to commend you, Ray, for just being bold. I was talking to Kyle earlier today, just getting prepared for this call, and Townhall, it's a little new, a little out of my comfort zone, but I will say we do have to take the fight. We got to take the fight to them. Being passive as a believer is something that I'm not anymore, and it's why I started our channel. Because at the end of the day, if I'm gonna die on the hill, I'm gonna die fighting for Christ, because that's the only thing that's worth it. And I want to encourage all of the people that listen to go read Daniel chapter 3. Read Daniel chapter 3 for yourself. It will encourage you in terms of the position as a believer that we should take in our heart against these wicked, evil edicts that come out from man. We are obligated to listen to the Lord first, and everything else is second.
Amen. Yeah, Ray, great job. This was really awesome. So
Yeah. Todd, if you had anything, or we're good to close.
Ray,
Awesome.
I'd just like
Well,
to thank you for putting this on, for the work that you've been doing. You've encouraged me, and I see the comfort blanket being taken away from the church and from us as believers on an individual level. The guardrails are off, and God's calling us to be strong and courageous, to get out of our comfort zones, to rely on Him. And as difficult as these times are, I see this as an opportunity for the church to grow, to become strong, and to really focus on His Word, and to just live the life that Christ has called us to pick up our cross in a real and meaningful way. And so I would just encourage those watching to do that, to trust in the Lord, and to be bold and strong.
Amen.
awesome.
amen.
Awesome, man. Let me just say, if you want to support more content like this, more of this mission, you can subscribe at the very least to Evangelical Dark Web, the channel. And if you really want to support this content, I have a Patreon type system set up at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. That's in the menu. You can navigate that. And that's how you can support this. And so that's all we got to say for now about the subject, and have a blessed one, and we'll catch you later.
All right. Be blessed, gentlemen.
Yep.